So I want to draw your attention to another bit of politics that's taken place in foreign policy. Elegant, uh, subtle belligerence, and yet it has all the hallmarks of working in regards to what it's trying to accomplish. It is not trying to accomplish anything for the good. It is trying to accomplish keeping the United States in a perpetual conflict. And I think we're going to see when Biden takes office that that is basically what will happen. What I'm talking about is the politics that is being played right now between the United States and Iran and Israel, actually, and the way that Netanyahu and Trump are basically working politics where the logic of it is going to force a breaking or continued fracture in the relationship between the United States and Iran, regardless of what Joe Biden wants. Meaning, it doesn't matter what Joe Biden wants coming into the office. The politics, the logic of it, in and of itself creates the crisis point where he is not going to be able to pull himself back without making serious concessions that I have a hard time believing that Joe Biden would ever be able to make. I want to talk about forced moves. Forced moves based on the logic of interactions between politics, tit for tat, etc. And the way that administrations can reach from their own failed administration into subsequent other administrations. Donald Trump right now is basically trying to get what he wants to accomplish, his final items accomplished. If you notice, he's trying to get the troops out of the various countries, be it Afghanistan or Somalia or Syria, drawing down, maybe not necessarily trying to get all of them out, but also on this issue of Iran, that people have had a question mark on whether or not Joe Biden is going to go back to the JCPOA. I'm going to make a prediction. Trump is going to do everything in his power to make that answer a no. And to make that answer a no in a way where Biden is not going to be able to go back to it because the relations between the countries are going to be so soured based on what Trump does and the way Biden has to respond to the repercussions of it. Let's talk some politics. And let's talk foreign politics at that. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. If you guys dig this content, definitely give us a like, share the video. Also, make sure you're subscribed. Google, YouTube is doing some funny business. So definitely make sure you hit the subscription button and make sure you hit the bell so you will know when I am doing the news. This story is fascinating and it is something that people should pay attention to. Donald Trump came into office belligerent towards Iran, and there but go the grace of God, go us, that a war hasn't started up to this point. Donald Trump seems to is willing to push it up into the point of a war. But the catch here is the decisions that he makes in that office and the things that he does, the Brinksmanship, doesn't always allow him to get the final say in what happens. When he murdered Soleimani, Iran was well within his right to respond, I suppose, in any way it saw fit, right? The United States basically murdered a guy, making this argument that at some point in time, there was an attack that was imminent. And he said, okay, when? Well, at some point. But yeah, imminent confers the meaning that it was supposed to take place immediately. And you killed a guy who's basically a head of state. It would be like the murdering, I don't know, John Kerry or something. And we acted as if it wasn't a big deal, as if that person wasn't important, at the very least, to that population. It is utterly astonishing. We worked with the guy at one point in order to fight ISIS, and then bam, off with his head, having no issue with potential repercussions of it. When they attacked our base, Donald Trump tried to act as if it wasn't that big of a deal. No, those soldiers were injured because those were real attacks on the military armaments in Iraq. It was proportional, what they would consider proportional. Tit for tat. They couldn't allow it to go past. The last thing you can do is allow an enemy to believe that they can attack and you have no capacity to respond. That you are basically incentivizing, asking, almost calling for additional attacks, inviting additional attacks, if it is indeed believed that the person doesn't have the capacity to respond to an enemy that's attacking them. They responded. The point that I'm trying to make here is right now, you have a Biden administration that is coming into office. On top of a Biden administration that's coming into office, you have a Trump administration that's leaving and that's trying to sew up loose ends. You have almost a sycophant to Netanyahu in Donald Trump. And in that sycophant, it is very clear that Netanyahu is willing to fight to the last dead American in order to sew up various loose ends in the Middle East. One of those is Iran. This merger of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, and joining this Israel in this way is tilted against Iran. It is this thing which is the weirdest thing in the world because Israel has nuclear weapons. Israel is belligerent. Iran hasn't attacked anybody. And yet, here we are. And this is the context to which the United States frames the argument about this stuff. Is utterly amazing. What is taking place right now, though, is that Trump is going to leave office. And they want to sew up loose ends in regards to the United States and Iran, meaning they don't want Biden to be conciliatory in any particular way. So how do you do it? Any attack on Iran will invite response. It has to, right? Tit for tat. You have to be able to respond to an opponent in order to get across that you are not, basically you don't want to invite attacks. So think of the number of attacks that have taken place. You've had the murder of Soleimani, assassination. You've had the murder of a scientist recently, a couple of days ago. And this was done by some kind of automated gun in a car. Yes, they were using basically automated technology in order to perform a hit. But you also had another general that was recently killed that you haven't necessarily heard about in US media. Meaning within 1 year, you've had multiple people murdered, assassinated in Iran. The nuclear scientists, again, and all of these people, the Iranian government has basically said there will be consequences. Well, yeah, but Iran and Israel has put itself on high alert. Yes, they put themselves on high alert. Great. But understand, from the standpoint of Israel, from the standpoint of America, especially with Trump, there's no loss. Whatever Iran does is going to be used as fodder and reasoning for further action by the United States. Meaning, if Iran uses a proxy to respond, the United States is going to immediately declare that Iran was a response, and Joe Biden, the incoming president, is going to have to do something, and being conciliatory is not part of that doing something. Any reaction that Joe Biden takes at that point is going to be wrong, because Iran wasn't the one that started this. Keep in mind, when Donald Trump came in, he basically ripped up the JCPOA. Iran stayed with the JCPOA for basically a year. The interesting thing here, and the thing that needs to be understood, is that even though Iran stayed with it for a year, they got no points for that from Europe. They got no points. The honest reality of it is you would expect that if you sign up to a program with several other nations, and it is clear as day that all of these nations says, yes, you're attending to the rules of the deal. Iran, the United States, is not. And yet, what did they do? They yelled at Iran when Iran made note of, hey, we may increase the number of enrichment. Don't you dare. How are you shaking your fists at Iran when it's the United States is the one that pulled out of this deal? Each and every one of those European countries had the United States dick in its mouth, and for whatever reason couldn't say it. Couldn't get the words out that the United States is the culprit. The United States is wrong. And Iran, in this instance, was on the side of the angels. Iran, again, tried to stay with the deal, tried to keep the deal alive, tried to use politics, but it didn't matter. The belligerents still came, even with them trying to stay with the deal. You had ships that was moving to those areas, drones that was flying over in their territory. I mean, it was utter astonishing. Donald Trump put with a pressure strategy, and that level of brinksmanship pulled us closer and closer to the brink of war. In this very specific instance, though, with the killings of all of these people, Iran has to respond. And the catch becomes, when do they respond? How do they respond? And what is an incoming administration of Biden going to do when they respond? And therein lies the problem. Iran is not going to immediately go back to the JCPOA. Why would they go back to the JCPOA considering what has been taking place? And right here, this is them saying, yeah, we're no longer going to subject ourselves to the inspections.
Iran, that this one-sided game is all.
Yeah, we're no longer going to subject ourselves to these inspections because it was always one-sided. You basically had a situation where the atomic agency would go into the nuclear deal for Iran. But what was Iran getting out of that, considering the actions of the United States? So Biden is going to come in, and what is Biden going to do? Now, my assessment was that Biden was going to come in, and Biden was not going to accept going back to the original deal, that he was going to push for somewhat more. Now, the reason I think that, or thought that, had to do with not wanting to look weak in one part by saying, I want to go back to the deal. Yes, he could frame that in that sense. But also, in one sense, maybe even not liking the deal or needing leverage for something to give away in order to get back to something that was akin to the deal, since it's very possible that Iran would never go back to a deal with the United States under any kind of guidelines that was similar to the last deal. The U.S. could not be trusted. The U.S. was the one that broke the deal. Yeah, why would they go back to it? So right off the bat, you have somewhat of a conflict between Biden and Iran with the JCPOA, but that conflict gets that much more significant the moment Iran responds. And like I said, the Western powers is not going to look at this in the light of, well, wait a minute, the U.S. did X, Y, Z that provoked this reaction, in which case provoked this reaction. They're not going to do that. They're going to say Iran did X, just like they couldn't necessarily bring themselves to criticize and condemn the United States' actions when it pulled out of the JCPOA. They couldn't even protect Iran when it pulled out of the JCPOA because the companies or the governments were so weak that in comparison to the U.S. economic dominance, that they couldn't shield the economies. Why would Iran stick to a deal that nobody else is sticking with, and it's causing them hardships? I can't blame them for pulling out of this. I can't blame them for saying they're not going to bring, allow inspectors in for enrichment. You're basically, to put it in real broad terms, murdered multiple people in that government and thought it was okay to do so. Whether it was the General Soleimani, whether it was the nuclear scientists, whether it was the other general in Iraq and Syria. And these killings, these targeted killings, are there for the explicit purpose of provoking a reaction that would force the incoming administration to respond. Israel is willing to fight to the last dead American. And yes, it would absolutely pull America into some kind of conflict in the Middle East during the transition, especially if they believe Biden would not be as obsequious as Trump. Then it becomes important to get Biden and get America involved into something that is not in the best interest of the country, that it gets involved in tension right off the bat with Iran. That makes it that much more difficult for any level of negotiation. The point of this is to break the JCPOA. The JCPOA may already be dead. Biden is basically saying he wants more than the JCPOA, that's no longer enough for him. Biden is arguing that, where is it? Well, two things. It's been said that Israel was behind the assassination. That's the first point. Also, Joe Biden is making new demands. Iran would have to address its malign regional activities through proxies in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. Basically, he doesn't want the JCPOA. That's basically what that means. He's basically saying, look, in order for me, the United States, to come back to the deal, despite the fact that the U.S. pulled out the deal, in order for me to come back to the deal, you're going to have to deal with your activities that we don't particularly like in the other countries. Think about this for the moment. The United States has been putting money into terrorists in Syria and Libya. I mean, you have them selling slaves in Libya right now as a result of the civil war that was caused by the U.S. actions, and not to mention the drone strikes. And in Syria, you had 500,000 people dead as a result of U.S. actions. And so the idea that the U.S. believes it has some kind of high horse after a Trump administration and after an Obama administration before that started a litany of wars, getting hundreds of thousands of people dead. And the U.S. believes it's in a position to basically make demands. Hate to tell you this, it was you that pulled out. It was you, meaning the U.S., that fucked up and wasn't attending to the deal itself. If anybody needs to have some level of contrition, it needs to be the U.S. But Biden can't bring himself to do it. And America's dick that is in the mouth of all of the European leaders, they themselves won't either, which what makes this so dangerous. There's no reality to it in real terms where Iran responds and the world understands that the response has to do with the number of people that the U.S. and Israel were murdering. The murdering to intentionally elicit a response. But again, Europe is not that honest when it comes to America. So basically the politics that is being played is to tarnish the Iranian government relations with the Biden administration. Fact of the matter is, you probably don't even have to do this, considering what Joe Biden is pushing for, meaning that JCPOA is off, period. They burned Rouhani. Rouhani was the moderate when he came into office. He was the person who explicitly came in to make that deal with the United States. And when you've just burned the guy, you've made the guy look like an asshole. You have a bunch of hardliners that didn't want to do the deal in the first place, and now those hardliners basically can say, we told you so. The country doesn't have nuclear weapons. And I have to be honest, if I was head of the country, I would be trying to get nuclear weapons to use as a deterrent. Israel has nuclear weapons and they attack willy-nilly. The United States backs Israel in those repeated attacks. Iran, who has Iran attacked? They don't have nuclear weapons, and yet the United States responds in this way. The only reason this is being done, let's be very honest, is to ensure that Iran is never a real threat. Meaning the idea is we're going to lay on your neck so we can attack you and hit you at any particular moment, at any particular time we want, for any particular reason. You can't do anything about it. And the United States is going to ensure that you can't get nuclear weapons to use as a deterrent. Here's the catch. Every last oil field in Saudi Arabia can be hit. And what would that do to the world's market? That would also be a nuclear bomb, whether or not it has enrichment, uranium, or whatever else that's associated with the bomb. Meaning Iran's attack can be things that would be cataclysmic in regards to their impact in our society. It does not require a nuclear weapon. And the Brinksmanship that is being employed here is astonishing in regards to what can be wrought. It doesn't seem that Joe Biden is interested in going back to the JCPOA at all anyway, so it's almost a moot point. And the relationship between Iran and the U.S. seems like it's going to remain tense and continue to be so. Not entirely because of Trump, by the way, because Joe Biden just doesn't seem to be all that into it, unless this is him posturing because he wants to get something a little bit less where he gives up those items and Iran comes back to the table and they come up with a deal and so forth. Yes, that could be politics being played in that way, but it also could be politics where Joe Biden just doesn't believe in the deal in the first place, and that Trump pulling out has given him space and opportunity to basically not be a part of that deal. I think he's a warmonger. In fact, I know he's a warmonger. And we're going to get a chance to see that administration. You have all of these lefties that voted for this. You're going to get what you voted for. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all. Let's see. We have Darren Levy. Watch out for the Iranian election next year. The hardliners, yes, will be back, and sadly, Rouhani represented the moderates who attempted, right, to embrace the West. Yes, because think about what he's saying. Rouhani came in with the idea that, all right, we're gonna reach out to the West. We had the hardliner. What is it? Mahmoud. I can't think of his name. I can see his face, but he was a hardliner, right? And he had a point in regards to his antagonism towards the West. I mean, for fuck's sake, we knocked over the government. We toppled their government. But beyond that point, Rouhani comes in. And the thought is, we're going to make peace. We're going to try to come to some kind of agreement, some kind of understanding. We're going to get the economy up and running. We're going to be different. And what did we do? We signed a deal and then immediately turned around, broke terms of the deal. They stayed with it for a whole nother year, and we attacked them relentlessly, militarily, economically, and through voice. And the European leaders that were supposed to help and ensure that the people stayed fair in their agreement dropped the ball entirely. And the U.S. was able to put through those sanctions and attack them. So, yeah, why wouldn't the hardliners come back in that situation? They tried the moderate. You tried the nice guy. You tried the, perfect beard guy. I don't think you're going to get him next time. You may, because the people in the country actually really do want this conflict to end. I mean, the number of people that have died as a result of the sanctions, for example. I mean, you realize that Iran has also COVID cases, and the ability for them to get drugs and so forth has been basically encumbered because of the sanctions that the United States has been employing. The people there want it to stop. And so, I don't know. I mean, you make it a situation where the people say, well, no, we don't want the hardliner in because we think it'll be worse, et cetera, et cetera. Or you might get people say, yeah, screw that. I don't want anything to do with it. And considering what we just saw in Parliament there, where they was like, yeah, we're done with the IEA coming in, the Atomic Energy Agency coming in to do their checks. Then yeah, hardliners are probably coming back. But understand, those hardliners are coming back as a direct result of what the United States was doing, not as an act of magic. Iran came to the table. Iran made the deal. Iran stuck by the deal, even with a belligerent United States. And you can't blame them for leaving that deal. Can't blame them at all. They stuck with the deal, and we've murdered multiple people while they were with the deal, or at the very least in the orbit of that deal. That's what we're talking about here. And the United States, when Soleimani was killed, the majority of the population thought it was a clean murder. Think about that. We just murdered a guy. We couldn't even give you a just reason why we murdered the guy. We just murdered him. And because he was Iranian, the American public, with all of the propaganda that he gets about Iranians, acted as if his life was less than an American's, or that it mattered not at all. As if he was some kind of video game character that just went up in smoke. You wouldn't feel that way if it was some kind of American citizen that got snuffed out. I guarantee you, and this goes to the hypocrisy that liberals have in this country, where a murder abroad somehow matters less than what takes place domestically. Yeah, Darren Levy, I agree with you. The hardliners may come back after all of this, especially considering the moderates wasn't able to get what they wanted to accomplish. We try to reach out to you, and even that is not accepted. Yeah, that's unfortunate. That is unfortunate. All right, I'm going to end this here. I want to say like, share, and of course, subscribe. Thanks all.